candle things that are in back? Your candle holders?
Your candle.
Shabbat candle holders.
Oh, thank you.
They're in the
You're right.
kitchen.
There are two pairs, a couple, maybe even three. A couple.
Thank you, or I can bring the box,
Well, I
but
know how to walk that far.
I know, and you know where to look. Okay, I'll ask.
Stay in the back in the same room?
Yeah,
They're in the
Okay,
anterior room.
thank you.
thank you.
There's some really colorful, and interesting rented linens for the B'nai Mitzvah on Saturday in that room.
Yeah, now you know why.
So there's rented linens for the B'nai Mitzvah lunch on Saturday. That's also in the kitchen anteroom. So you might just enjoy, like, that'll be the making most when you walk in there. Well, because you're gonna walk in there and then you'll be like, what are these things? And I'm preempting that question. And then Mona, to be honest, the golden napkins, give them a feel. They're like velvet.
That's fun.
I feel guilty using them to wipe
So a
my
month
mouth off.
ago, my daughter had her younger daughter's bat mitzvah, and it was really blessed, and it was like, that's so not my style. Just keep it simple, you know? This 13-year-old likes the fancy and frilly.
Okay.
But that's me, I'm making it in
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I know.
I don't mind everyone's knitting and my jacket getting to be. But the and jacket and a hat. And it's a red hat from Minnesota.
So I talked to the rabbi about Easter Anthem program. He's agreeable, but I said, I don't want to be the one who's totally, you know, it's like, I'd be happy to help. I want to help with content and choosing films and that's.
There's a sponsored all day for Asper Friedman, who's next.
I don't know whether it'll ever get off the ground or not, but he seemed amenable to it. Yeah.
I think there'd be a lot more.
I know,
people.
right? So we can lie to
It's still early and I also think people have, what can I say, you know?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot more people. It's
This had
no
been-
way
That's why they came
about
early.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, you're probably right.
Pretty overwhelming to know the answer.
On so many different dimensions. Yeah, inside.
We started watching. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen, I just started watching it.
Much better place to meet. This is a much better
Yes,
place.
yes, it does.
In the ladies' room. Hi, nice to see you.
Well, it was an Israeli series before.
I didn't think you were here.
That's what made me feel.
Did you bring the police?
And so many of the films that we watched, actually, you could see the seeds of so many things that.
So I said to be away for meetings. I was there all night.
Yeah.
And I had,
Yeah.
It was good, and I think every time.
and I didn't want to
Well, it was a
drive
nice,
that.
you see the Ezra Klein.
Makes sense.
I don't like driving
Road.
sidewalks.
It's on New York Times. So,
So no, no.
Say you were fine in
and
the ER?
it's just the bottom line, when you start working, it's like, you don't
For
know.
about 3 years. And I had the
Chances
chance.
are that something.
He coaches basketball for,
Yeah.
like their kids were just.
So I got it.
Oh, yeah, okay. Call me.
Yes. Sometimes it's good. But I don't know what I say.
And well, I also had this. And I
Chemistry professor from the, has an adult daughter who's currently.
All right.
And it's how people
better off than
I
always.
just want to
Better off,
I'd say I think doing what she needs to do is good, but she needs a lot of support. I get a lot of late night phone calls.
What did you have?
They live right behind the library and
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, as perfect as you're gonna do.
my brother-in-law says a perfect life. And then I had some minor surgery, just some things that, just a lot to do.
Which one? Yes.
Well, Wayne put them in.
I said I lived several times in
You're here.
Mama's always here.
What do you want?
I asked Dale if you and Steven are gonna be here tonight. This one I'm sure.
I'm not supposed to be here.
You're not supposed to.
Steve thought I was here at the wrong day.
Yeah.
I just came to
Instead of Phoenix,
went to the ER and everything. Oh, she, I like
Rarely.
Don't even get me started. Don't even get me started.
And he's here too. Hey, Dale.
Drop it on your.
Hey, friend.
Okay.
oh, no problem. She got stranded in Sydney.
Ladies know I'm not used to it here. Like focus all of our people on this side, because that's on this traffic.
She paid a fortune for a Delta flight to go into the wasn't going to them. So they sent her back to the hotel.
You're on the pride side, or?
She had to stay in the hotel for 2 nights here.
Yeah, well, like, you know.
Now you dress code. Oh, okay.
We know. What were you gonna say to me?
It's right there. You can ask her. She's all right. She's better every day.
Frankly, do you know where Brookfield is? It's right on It's so, anyway, it's just a community.
Think about people that I know that have serious heart
I should be your family.
So I'm glad that you're gonna be there.
are controllable and
Are we, if we sit here, is that okay? Just
You came to talk to me tonight.
what's that?
He wants everything kosher.
To the back of your head. So Stephen, if people have questions, can they type in there, or should we just say no questions for the streamers?
I mean, you could, and then you just do it at the end.
Or is that?
I mean, you could solicit it, it's a timing thing. Because if it's part of like a topic that's, you know, any timeliness, they're gonna be really.
So, if something's super urgent, so
Drive is a very.
no, I'm mentioning that, Stephanie.
Is this the bride side, Noah said, and this is the groom side? Okay, so. All right, we're going to start just because it's 7 o'clock, and I value people's time as much as possible, and it's fun to be with everybody. When we set this meeting, Stephanie and I said it 3 weeks ago, we were so excited because we were going to launch our 2027 Israel trip. And we haven't taken an Israel trip as a community in a while, and I thought it was important that the first trip that I staff was a trip to Israel. And then the world, as it does, takes you in different directions, and thought it'd be a little tone deaf to have a conversation around trip as important as it might be, and as important as I think it is to Israel next year. And also realized that people were going to ask me questions that I would have no idea what the answers were for. And I decided I wanted to not go down that road. So I'll leave it as we still plan on going to Israel. And I think it will still be important. And certainly our itinerary might be adapted, but we have a really good itinerary. And I think it'll be really important to visit Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and the Holy Land and to engage. And we still have to do that almost exactly a year from now. And I guess my prayer and my hope is that at some level, the noise of this week and the noise of war has some potential to lead towards quiet and peace. Whether you are skeptical about that, I understand, but at least aspirationally, that there will be some pathway towards that. And then when we decided, Stephanie and I decided on Tuesday that we should adapt this this gathering, I was like, well, I live 4 doors down from John Peavy-House, who is the immediate past chair of the political science department at the University of Wisconsin. And he's coached my son in Little League for 2 seasons. And that's right. And that he is to become really good friends with our family, with Aaron. And so I was like, texted John yesterday. And I said, hey, what are you doing at 7 o'clock tomorrow night? And he said, I was planning on watching the basketball game and having a beer. And I was like, well, you can't do that till 8:30. And so how great. So let me introduce John just a tad more formally. And then I think the frame of this would be both one to, how important is that we gather to ask questions, right? Like, what's more Jewish than that? To express doubt, to express hesitations, to express concerns. So I also want to make sure that, this is a caring community that would be open to that, but as well as learning from John, to sort of be able to do a twofold thing over the course of the next hour or so. And John, I know you're used to undergrads, so this is a pretty hostile group compared to undergrads, but I think you can handle them. So, yeah. And thanks to all of those who are streaming with us tonight. So thank you, Stephen, for helping us figure that out as well. So John Peavy-House is the Mary Herman Rubenstein Professor of International Relations and Political Methodology. He is also Development Chair of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Political Science Department. He is the immediate past chair of the department. His interests lie in international relations, international political economy, U.S. foreign policy. He was telling me he was teaching a class just yesterday with undergrads about U.S. foreign policy, international organizations and political methodology, and how fitting that it is that you are here joining us at Beth El. I'll start with this, and then I'm going to give you the microphone for a little bit. I think many of us in the Jewish world, and I think probably beyond the Jewish world, are like holding this very tricky dynamic and this tricky tension in our heads. Like, on one hand, we are clear-eyed about the horrors of the Iranian regime. Like, we don't, the brutal oppression of its own people, through detention, through torture, through murder, the arming of proxies that have directly impacted the state of Israel, be they Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis. We are, clear-eyed about the evil, and I say that word intentionally, that they have brought on many people throughout the region as a destabilizing force. And yet, we're really nervous about war without a plan, without, a total distrust of the Netanyahu and Trump governments, and but also we know that many of our friends and families have been running to bomb shelters in Tel Aviv and in Haifa over the past 4 or 5 days, and I think some of us are sitting like we don't really know what to do, and we don't know how to handle this, and when we don't love thoughts and prayers as much as thoughts and prayers are important, but that also feels a little bit incongruous. So that's a statement, not a question, but I'll let you respond to the statement. And then we will obviously have time for a Q&A with John or with me or with others. So here's the mic.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming out. Right, that's. I think that's a very appropriate statement. I have any number of different thoughts and things to say. I will keep this brief and really want to hear your questions and address your questions. As John said, I've been teaching at the university since 2000. I came here in 2000. I left for a couple years, did a walk in the wilderness, came back. It was Chicago. And I've been teaching at a course on American foreign policy when 9/11 happened, during the Great Recession, when Russia invaded Ukraine twice, and after October 7th. So I'm going to stop teaching this course because every time I teach it, something unfortunate happens. So I'm going to take this in a particular direction, but please push me in other ways or ask anything. One of the things I told my students, and many of those students have interest, some of them have family in Israel, some of them have families in other parts of the Middle East, in the Gulf, right? And many of them are concerned, and they have similar, there aren't a lot of people shedding tears for the Iranian regime right now, the regime itself, and yet there's this concern about what's happening, what's the plan, how is this going to look? Is this going to be the first Gulf War, where in 1991, where there's some very clear-eyed operations with, help by the United States, where there's a goal, it's achieved, and it's over? Or is this 2003, where it's sort of we go in, things look good in the first month, and then things look bad for the next 10 years? And I think those are the types of analogies, the scenarios that are on a lot of people's minds, my students and other people I talk to in the community. I want to say a couple of things, and I am more than happy to talk about sort of the Israeli action here and sort of how I think what's going on there in Israel, both in terms of Iran, but also in terms of Lebanon, which I think to me is actually in some ways a more important and not more interesting, but a more important front in this current conflict. But let me tell you two things that I told my students. Number one, at a time like this, we live in an age with social media, with 24/7, everyone has your algorithm. They think they know what you want to read and hear and see and talk to online. And it is drinking from a fire hose. You're constantly getting information. Every word out of Trump's mouth you're hearing, every word out of Rubio's mouth, everything out of what's left of the Iranian regime, Bibi, everyone you're hearing from. Separating the signal from the noise is difficult. So what I did for my students, and I'll do super briefly here, is I said, Tuesday, it was our first class after the war, 5 days into the war. We went back to look at the headlines. What was being talked about 5 days into the Afghanistan War, the first Gulf War, and the second Gulf War? And we showed the headlines from the Times, the Wall Street Journal. Almost all of those headlines eventually had nothing to do with the outcomes of those wars and the key issue. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the things we're obsessing over today, and you're reading about and it's being pumped at you, some of those are super important, and I have a couple important questions regarding that, but a lot of it is just you're being pushed content. And so I think it's always an important thing to try to sit back, separate the signal from the noise, and know that not every headline you read is going to be definitive, important, or frankly relevant sometimes. And so that's, I think, an important reminder. The second thing that I want to address is this question of, as John started, this awful regime in Iran. No one that I know of, other than Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, are sad that the regime is gone. But then, what's next, I think, is the important question to kind of focus on is what is next. And I think my thoughts on this are, we don't know. Anyone who tells you they know just is wrong. They don't. No one knows. It's not clear to me exactly what the plan is. That's a little okay. Like, it's okay to be flexible. It's okay to kind of see, as anyone who's ever served in the military will tell you, the best laid plans don't survive first contact with the enemy. And so those things collapse. And so then what are the issues? One thing I would just remind you, again, given how the pace seems so fast right now, there are two other regimes in the Middle East that no one shed tears when they fell. One was Syria and Hafez al-Assad and the Syrian leadership, and the other was Saddam Hussein with Iraq. Right? No one was sad that either of those regimes fell. What's similar to Iran is that no one's sad, but equally to Iraq and Syria, the Iran national security state, the repression state that has existed for 30 plus years in that country, and even frankly under the Shah, is extensive. It is far more extensive than Saddam had in Iraq. It is far more extensive than Assad had in Syria. It took a 12-year civil war to undo that in Syria, and it took 170,000 US troops to undo that in Iraq. What's going to do it in Iran? The idea that we're going to drop some bombs, or Israel and the US are going to drop some bombs, wave our hands, hope people come to the streets and change their government, I think is a pipe dream. That's not going to happen. The way most revolutions happen in history is that there might be an uprising, but that someone within the elite, someone within the regime decides, you know what, if we're going to save our necks, we've got to join these people on the street and take out some of the other bad people running the show, right? It's what we call elite splits, right? The elites, whether it's the military, whether it's someone within the civilian power structure, says enough's enough, and they're the ones who take out the other leaders, right? And that's almost a prerequisite to a successful change in regime that's going to stick and not turn out in chaos. If you look over the last 100 years, in Latin America, in Europe, Southern Europe in the 70s, all of these. And so that's kind of, and I don't think Trump doesn't understand that. He's been saying the last 2 days a lot, like, we hope the Revolutionary Guard takes their side. We hope all of the government officials surrender, And so I think the administration knows that's the model, but I think what makes a lot of folks, experts in the region, concerned is we don't see a lot of policy to try to promote that and follow that through, which leaves a lot of uncertainty. It just leaves a lot of uncertainty. And the last question I'll throw, and it's a question, it's not something I have an answer to, but what I just keep telling my students is my prediction is that in 2 to 3 weeks, Pete Hegseth at the Defense Department is going to stand up, or maybe Trump is going to stand up and say, we have crushed the Iranian regime. They have no navy. They have very little army. We've taken out their nuclear program. They have nothing left to project their power across the region. My question is then, does Trump stand up and say, we're done, goodbye? Or does he say, and we're going to keep making sure the right people lead the government so that they don't rebuild those capabilities or repress their own people, et cetera? And I don't know the answer to that question. And I think what makes me a little nervous about the current situation, again, completely agreeing that I'm not sad the regime could turn over, is what's the plan then? Because if you believe what Trump and Rubio said on Sunday, that's all we're there for. We're not there for regime change. We're there to degrade the military. Israel has said something slightly different, and Bibi has said something slightly different. He says they're there for regime change. And so just to put that out there in sort of the bleak scenario, that's where the US and the Israel start to have very differing opinions on what the end stage of this war looks like. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think for better or worse, we're gonna find out in a couple of weeks. There are many other things to talk about, but let me stop after offering those thoughts.
Can I ask you just to expand on the comment that you said in the very beginning about Lebanon?
Oh, yeah.
Because I do think that, certainly in terms of sort of what we think about Iran, Hezbollah, Israel, despite October 7th, and despite the attacks from Gaza, those who, read Israeli news and listen to Israeli podcasts and visit Israel know that on some level the threat from the north has actually historically been stronger than the threat from Gaza. Israel has, more control in what gets into Gaza than what it gets into Lebanon. So I just wanted to push you a little bit on how do we think about that. So.
Great, yes. So let me give, I don't know how far back you want to go. We could go a long ways. But let me just back up 2 years to 2024, right? The fall of 2024, there's a major Israeli invasion into Hezbollah to take out a lot of these missile positions that Hezbollah was using to sort of lob especially towards Haifa, but also Tel Aviv in northern Israel. And if you think about the geography of Israel, right, you have this sort of flat border, which then comes up around Metula and then over to the Golan. And in the 2024 peace agreement that ended that Israeli push, military IDF push, Israel came back to the border, but they left 5 outposts in Lebanon proper. And there's some maps of this floating around that are really fascinating. Sort of 5 points, 3 along that sort of what I would call the straight border to the Mediterranean, and then 2 around the Golan, 1 around the Golan, north of Mount Hermon, and 1 around Metula. So when you hear over the last 24 hours, Israel has pushed into Lebanon, that's where they're pushing from. So they're going in, and their goal is to take out these Hezbollah missiles that are now flying with increasing frequency, violating this 2024 ceasefire. Why did Hezbollah do that? Well, Iran asked them to because they're an Iranian proxy, and they just want to, in general, increase chaos in the region at this point. Iran does. So Israel is starting to push. Obviously, Israel has unleashed a major aerial campaign, especially against the southern suburbs of Beirut, which tend to be where a lot of the Shia live in Beirut, as opposed to the north, which tend to be more Christian, the east, which tends to be more Sunni. And so I'm sure at this very moment, there are a lot of munitions being dropped in southern Beirut. And again, the whole point is to degrade Hezbollah. If you remember, Hezbollah was already degraded from the pager and cell phone attacks that happened there, was it 2 summers ago now? And so there is this tension, this deep concern in Israel about Hezbollah because they are more proximate than Iran. They're more well-armed than Hamas. They have historically been, right, really since the 80s, and the Israeli invasion in 81, there's been this deep tension between Lebanon and Israel. Previously the PLO, and then once the PLO left, it became the Hamas issue in that part of the region. So I think, let me say one other quick thing. I think the fascinating dynamic that's happening now is, of course, everyone says, oh, Lebanon and Hezbollah. Yes, but Lebanon is not Hezbollah. Hezbollah has its thumb on most of the people running Lebanon, but that is starting to change. Right, and in fact, President Macron of France today had a long conversation with the Lebanese president saying, well, hey, why don't you guys help go after Hezbollah? Right, free your country from Iran, get them out, get the Syrians out, the rest of the Syrians out, get any Republican Guard that are hiding. We know some of the Iranian Republican Guard have been stationed in places like near the Bekaa Valley in the east, and like get them out. And France is encouraging what I would call the Lebanese civilian government to rise up against Hezbollah and to try to evict them. And so sort of a more proper civilian, multi-religious government could take over Lebanon. I don't know if that will happen, but if it's going to happen, this would be a pretty propitious time for that to take place.
Before I will let other people ask questions, and then I do want to hear, not just questions, but also like an opportunity to express how you're feeling, and to hold the tension and the hesitation within it. But I don't even know how to ask this, but like, tell me about Bibi, right? Like, in my mind, like, Bibi was first elected prime minister in 1999. He hasn't been prime minister ever since 1999, but he has been first elected prime minister in 1999, right? Like, and I would say maybe, I don't want to assume how people in this community would necessarily feel, but I'm going to try. Like, I think there's no love lost for Bibi. Corruption, right? The inability to respond to October 7th in a military sense, the inability to ever take positions, the carte blanche to the Orthodox, the rise of settler violence, and yet this guy is like the most remarkable politician in the history of the world, right? Like, how do we think about them? There's supposed to be Israeli elections in October, right? If not sooner, if they don't call them sooner. Like, when we think about the manipulation of Trump, I don't know if that's fair or not, but that's what I read and that's what I hear. Like, can you just respond to him for a second? So,
yeah, sure. I'll do my best. I think, let me just say something very narrow first. One thing this war is doing, clearly it is, if you're a fan of some of the opponents of Bibi, this war is making life difficult for them. The Benny Gantzes of the world are now sort of saying, like, we support this war, like, we can't, this is a time of national unity, much like you saw after October 7th. And all this plays into, Bibi sort of staying in power, becoming more powerful. You mentioned elections. There was an MP member, a Knesset MP member yesterday saying, let's call elections for July, right, while we still have the rally around the flag going, and hopefully that will help get more of a, help cement the coalition. Obviously, the coalition that Bibi has built most recently relies on some individuals that I know many in the Jewish community find somewhat distasteful from
I
some
think you can
past behavior.
eliminate somewhat, but yes.
Okay, very distasteful, let's say. But, I think, look, what we know historically, one of the theories of political science, right, is that times of heightened insecurity lead people to tend to lean more to the right, become more conservative, not want political change, because all this other uncertainty is going on. They want continuity at home. And so I think that's what Israel is in for some time. And I think whether it was October 7th, whether it's this, whether it's July's war with Iran, between Iran and Israel, I think that is a way that Bibi is just continuing to both stay in power, but also, frankly, put off any reckoning that might be coming to him over these corruption charges, over the attempted, change of the judiciary system. So, yeah, I think Bibi is an opportunist, to say the least. And the question is, how much is he taking advantage of opportunities versus making his own opportunities? And again, it's difficult because he has, the million-dollar question is, has he made Israel more safe or less safe? And I think a lot of people in Israel would say more safe. And whether that's right or wrong, or whether you agree or disagree, I will tell you the opinion polling in Israel is fairly clear on that right now. And as I don't have to tell any of you who know people who live there, the body politic in Israel since the 80s has shifted significantly, both due to politics, I think both due to things like the Second Intifada, but also immigration from Russia. And there's sort of all of these dynamics that are happening that is pushed rightwards. And Bibi has both led that and been a beneficiary of it.
The only thing I would add is actually not just people. I mean, it's also people in this community. Sure. We sent out this email to the community on Tuesday, and I certainly got responses from some people that said, just because this is the best thing to ever happen in Israel. Like, we need to, when a country for years and years and years says we want to annihilate you, we need to start taking that seriously. And it's the first time that an American administration and an Israeli administration have taken that serious militarily. And to sort of say, those people exist in Israel, certainly, but they also exist at Temple Beth El. And even those people who might abhor Bibi in terms of oppression of Palestinians, in terms of religious rights for Reformed Jews in the land of Israel, in terms of settlement expansion, feel that we are naive if we don't take these threats seriously. Rabbi David Wolpe tells the story of who led a famously very Persian synagogue in Los Angeles, which is home to lots of Persian Jews, that he remembers clearly where somebody came up to him, one of the Iranians that was Jewish, and said to him, Rabbi, you have many nice ideas, but you grew up in Philadelphia. And to sort of think, how does that respond to it? All right, thank you so much, John. We'll turn it over to some questions. If people want to raise their hand, I'll walk a microphone around, and we'll see how we're doing. And then if we want to go in tangents, we can do that too. So, yeah. All right, Steve.
Always ready to jump in here. I'm more concerned about our abdication, American abdication of responsibility in terms of leadership, that we have given over leadership to people who call Somalians garbage and, and have no real plan for what's going to happen in the long run. And, are we so hungry for some great leader who's the best and that's ever been, we could just relinquish our responsibility to contribute to making decisions. Congress is not stepping up. And, we can't control the dynamics of what's going on in the war, but we have a responsibility now to sort of see what's happening and in terms of the politics of our own country and respond. So I wonder what you're thinking about that is.
Yeah, it's a great point. Let me take that two different ways. One is to think about our own internal political situation. My friend Kathy Kramer has a lot more intelligent things to say than I do about that. But, I think one thing I will just say on that in terms of the current situation, I agree on Congress. Actually wrote a book on the War Powers Act and Congress and how they kind of abdicated that they've abdicated in many ways to the president. It's not quite as stark as some would believe, but it's not good. Let me tell you what worries me about the current conflict and this, what you called an abdication of responsibility. In the beginning of the 2003 Iraq War, Colin Powell famously told President Bush when they said, well, what if a revolution, what if civil war breaks out in Iraq? And someone said, I think it was probably Rumsfeld was like, no, that's not going to happen. And Powell said, it might happen. And if you break it, you own it. And to their credit, the Bush administration and the neocons stayed. They tried to figure out what to do. My real fear is that Trump has no break it, you buy it. Look at Venezuela. We went in, we got the guy we wanted, and we're gone. Who cares? We go in, we crush Iran, who cares? And the reason that's a problem, for me, is both a moral problem, but it's also a security problem, right? This deep national security state that's been built in Iran has just uncountable numbers of small arms and light weapons. That's not what we're getting, or Israel is getting from the air. That's not what the U.S. is getting. We're getting the big stuff that we can see. We can't see the small stuff. And if there's a civil war, and if all hell breaks loose in Iran, those aren't going to stay in Iran. They're going to go to Azerbaijan. They're going to go into Iraq. They're going to make their way into Syria. They're going to work their way down to the Arabian Peninsula, into Yemen. And eventually they're going to find their way into Lebanon and Jordan and all the places surrounding Israel. And in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a mess. And if you don't, buy it when you break it. And I think a lot of people who study the region will tell you that right now, but I think there's not a great awareness of that right now in terms of the planning. And so that's what I think about when I think about kind of the responsibility angle and the responsibility that comes with the ability to use force like this internationally.
And then I'll go to you next.
So you said that Netanyahu and Trump had very different visions of the end game. And I didn't think Trump had a vision of the end game. And I haven't heard Netanyahu articulate it.
Just because people are streaming, so they won't hear your question. We're not right in the microphone.
So I'm asking about the end games of Netanyahu and Trump. I didn't know that Trump had an end game vision, and I haven't heard Netanyahu articulate his, and maybe that's because I haven't been reading the Israeli papers. But I'm curious if you could expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, question about, what is the end game? Do they have a different vision? I don't know. Again, I really don't know what the Trump vision is. I think so far I will say, and I don't mean this to be mean, but I think it depends on the day and what he's saying. Two quick things. Number one, this summer, when the war started when Israel went to take out the Iranian nuclear sites, one of the first things Bibi said was, we're going to do this, we're going to destroy their nuclear program, and we want a new regime in power. Trump said, we're going to help, but we don't care. He literally said, we don't care about regime change this summer. And the day after, Bibi stopped saying that. And Bibi stopped talking about regime change in Iran. And the word on the street was, Trump basically called him and said, nope, this isn't a regime change war. We want to take their nukes out, nothing more. Now fast forward to today. And if you believe, one of the IDF spokespersons gave a press conference today in Tel Aviv, and he said, we wanted to do this in the summer. But given the protests and the crushing of the protesters in December and January in Iran, we accelerated our timetable. Now, there's a debate about, did they bring Trump along? Did Trump push them himself? I don't know that we'll ever know that. There'll be lots of theories about that. But Bibi is still saying, we want regime change in Iran. Trump is not saying that. Trump sometimes said, today he said, I want to pick the next leader of Iran. But the Pentagon, I don't know if you saw the spokesperson for the Pentagon, not Kane, but their policy spokesperson, testified in front of Congress. And they asked him, is it now the U.S. position that we are going to take out leaders that we don't like? And his answer was, we did not do that. Israel did that. That was Israel's doing, and it was their idea. This is someone at the Pentagon saying the official U.S. position is, we're not sad that Khamenei's gone, but that was all Israel. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I need the microphone.
Yeah, this means people are streaming, Judith, yeah.
Yeah. So, is a regime change a vision? Because it seems to me that you're changing a leader, but you have to deal with this deep security state, and I don't see the vision there.
No, I don't either. I will say, if to be really blunt, if there is one, Israel is more likely to have it than the U.S. right now. But you know, again, this idea that people are just going to rise up and there'll be a revolution and it'll all be fine. It just, history doesn't usually work that way. Let's hope.
I was just looking for a real vision.
But yeah, no, I can't tell you what that would look like. Again, you know, we've heard everything thrown against the wall from we're going to arm the Kurds and the Kurds are going to come in to maybe the Kurds seem to be doing this, although interestingly today, the Kurdish leadership itself said, no, we're not doing that. Iraq said the Kurds are going to do this. The Iraqi government said the Kurds are going to go in because a lot of the Iranian Kurds have taken refuge in Iraq. But the leader of the Iraqi Kurds were like, we're not going to support that. Now, it could all be myth, you know, who knows? That's why I say this is the signal from noise problem. Like if you read all the headlines, you'll just get dizzy. But I think, but that's the question. And you know, then you start thinking, and here's another thing to keep in mind, which just isn't being reported on that much. People say, oh, Iran's a very homogenous society. It's not. It's 61% Persian. There's a whole lot of Baluchistan in the southeast corner, which, by the way, has been trying to be independent for 40 years and is being repressed. That's on the border of Pakistan, who themselves are now at a war with Afghanistan, right? And there's all kinds, that's becoming a porous border, and who knows where those weapons will end up, if they end up in Pakistan and then Kashmir. The Azeris are a very large percent of the population in the northwest corner along that border. There's more, the Balakis tend to be more Sunni. There's a more Sunni community on the eastern, kind of northeastern side as well. It is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. And is it quite as fractured historically as an Iraq or a Syria? Maybe not, but that's also because the deep national security state, right? And the repression both of the Shah and of the Ayatollah.
So I have concern, not a fear, of terrorism coming to our shores. And especially, you were talking about referencing July. I'm thinking about this July 4th, which is going to be the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I suspect there's going to be celebrations all throughout the country. I'm hoping there's no terrorism at that time. But it seems like some of the Middle Eastern terrorists, they kind of like to pick a holiday. And so that's my big concern. Not a fear, but it's a concern.
Yes, and I think that is obviously a very legitimate concern. And I do think there are these focal points, whether it's either place-wise, right, the World Trade Center was attacked multiple times until 9/11. There were a couple millennium plots we disrupted over millennium celebrations, we know. You know, I think there's a lot of concern over sleeper cells, that kind of issue, and that's always been, historically, Iran's deterrent, is Iran will unleash all of these terrorists that they have trained and distributed all over the world. I am, how to put this, I'm a little less concerned. I share your concern. I'm a little less concerned myself because I think you know, there's not this. Iran has spent most of its time and effort on Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. Might there be Iranian sleeper cells around? Yes. Might there be even some lone wolf terrorist groups who use Iran in their war or any other war in the Middle East as a justification for doing something around July 4th or any other time? Absolutely. So I see the concern. I guess, not to be too sanguine about it, I really don't mean this to be dismissive. I tell my students, they ask questions about terrorism, I'm like, you're not going to die in a terrorist attack. You're more likely to die crossing University Avenue between classes, right? And there's some actually amazing studies that show causes of actual human death are completely inversely correlated with internet searches about illnesses. Far, far, far more people search up, ask the question of Google or ChatGPT, am I going to die of terrorism, than ask, am I going to die of cancer or heart disease or in a car accident? Those are still, and will forever be the leading cause of death. Terrorism is rare. Is it awful when it happens? Yes. Does it kill completely innocent people? Yes. And that's why it concerns us all. And that's why it's kind of in the back of our mind when we travel, et cetera. But I just always try to remind people, like, we should be concerned, we should be vigilant. It's rare. It is rare.
I will answer that, Al. Like, I think Stephanie and I think about this more than anything else, right? In terms of like and we spend, a significant part of the Temple Bethel budget on, Madison Police Department, on our connections with Wisconsin Secure Communities Network. I mean, I would say like, and we are, we get the updates from many people. I mean, it is like something that we think about at the synagogue, and we have to, right, all the time. I'm certainly worried about rise of anti-Semitism, in general, and certainly after October 7th, and who knows now, right? But certainly things that we are really concerned about here at the synagogue. Jill, we'll go to you. So.
Well, getting back to Trump, it's hard for me to absorb any of the things that happen that Trump's the center of now without wondering what's he thinking about this? It seems to me like this has got to be about him, his the midterm elections, his well-being. So what's your thought about that?
No, thank you. It's a great question. Ed, look, right, let me give you different theories. I'm not going to say anymore. One is classic international relations theory called, diversionary war. Call it wag the dog, right? Like Epstein, bad economy, bad jobs reports. We're not talking about any of that anymore. Right. And we're not going to be for a month or two. I tend not to buy that theory because I think it sort of assumes everyone's just kind of a lemming and swallows everything. And indeed, so far all the polling that I've seen suggests this war is not popular. And I think the interesting other possible explanation was that he's trying to expand beyond his MAGA base because he's already losing his MAGA base because of Epstein. And this is going to further, right, I don't know if you've seen any of the Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Nick Fuentes, that horrible human being, right, is now telling everyone to vote Democrat. Right, the MAGA people have completely moved against him. Now, does that mean they're going to vote against Republicans? Probably not. It means they might not show up. But there's this huge fracture now in the MAGA community over Iran and over Venezuela. This was a guy who claimed, I'm never going to invade anywhere. And now he's done 2 major ones. And so for that reason, I think that makes your question really hard to answer. Like, this was someone who campaigned on, no more forever wars, no more nation building, no more intervention in the Middle East. And what has he spent a lot of the last 6 to 8 months doing? The Board of Peace, Iran, Venezuela, pressuring Cuba, right? And so what his ultimate goal is, I think he believes, I think there is part of him that believes like this truly will transform the Middle East and it will make it a safer place. It will allow Israel and the Saudis to reconcile, right? And he'll be the person responsible for that because of these actions. That's something he's fascinated with. He wants Israel and the Saudis to have an amicable, peaceful relationship where he gets to help do the investment and call the shots.
He gets the Nobel Peace Prize.
And he gets the Nobel Peace Prize, absolutely. And that could happen, but let me just say one quick thing. I think one of the fascinating aspects of what's been happening with the regime change question, until about 2 months ago, the Saudis, from what I hear, has been telling Trump no regime change in Iran. And the reason MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, didn't want regime change is fear of chaos and what that could mean. But frankly, and this is the fascinating, playing Risk on the board, right, when this past fall, when Israel tried to take out the Hamas commander in Qatar, that really, really made the Gulf states angry. And to the point where they all called the White House. And that's the one time where Trump is like, Bibi, never again. You do not do this, or we will do something to you, right? And that led the Gulf states to start saying, do we really want Israel to be the preeminent military power in the region? Because now it's Israel and Iran. But if you defang Iran, that leaves one country running all the military show in the entire Middle East, and that is Israel. Now, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, globally speaking, but the Gulf states are concerned about that. Eventually, MBS decides Iran's too much of a problem. I believe the Saudis believed that Iran was getting ready to attack, to preemptively attack. I don't know if that's true, but I think the Saudis came to believe that, and so MBS gave the green light to Trump and, frankly, to Israel. And that's why this is happening in some ways now. Doesn't really answer your question, but yeah.
And you made reference early on to the noise that we're all inundated with. And we all have our kind of favorite news sources. And unfortunately, in a time of chaos, I find myself drawn to those news sources that are going to kind of reaffirm my world perspective. I'm curious, is there kind of a news source that you rely on, that you trust, that can help give us the kind of balanced perspective that you're presenting tonight? I mean, this is just, you've done a marvelous job of being able to present both sides, or all sides, where some of the news sources I get exposed to aren't showing me a certain perspective.
That's a great question, and I think you're right. At times of crisis, that becomes especially hard to do. In fact, because that's the irony. You're getting pumped more information, yet there's actually probably less real information out there in a time of war and crisis. One of the first places I go to every day is actually the BBC, because it's a non-US, non-Middle East, but yet the British obviously have a deep history in the region, so they have lots of reporters, they have lots of infrastructure to do reporting. And it's just interesting to get their view on things. And I think they're very professional. Then I go to the Times, knowing it's left-leaning. I go to the Wall Street Journal, knowing it's right-leaning. And then from there on, just kind of start working both sides. And then eventually you end up at Fox and MSNBC and know that the truth is probably somewhere in between, back with the British. But yeah, I just try to alternate and know what I'm reading and know what the likely biases are. The interesting thing about the Wall Street Journal I found is that under Trump, they've become much more the writers have become much more centrist. The editorial board is still fairly right-leaning, and so most of them have been praising this so far. Yet a lot of the reports, like the stories filed at the Journal, are very Trump doesn't know what he's doing, and so you get this. But that's also interesting to see. It's just okay, the leadership of the paper are saying this, but the reporters are saying that. And again, as long as you're just sort of going in a bit clear-eyed with okay, I want to get a broad sampling. In terms of if you're ever interested in Asia thing, the Far East, it's a Singaporean newspaper, some great newspapers in Singapore that, again, just sort of have a clear-eyed view, I think, of China, Japan, Taiwan, those issues. BBC's great for Africa, too. Sorry? I will sometimes, Al Jazeera actually does occasionally have some very good reporting from the region. In terms of Israelis, Haaretz, J-Post, and then kind of start moving on from there. And then Al Jazeera. There's no really, Al Jazeera's kind of become the source for folks in Egypt in terms of English language, but yeah. So, but yeah, I just try to read broadly if you can. But
I was wondering what you thought of the negotiations that were going on before the war started. I have no illusions about the Iranian government, but I had read that there were some potential concessions being discussed on nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and then that was table flipped over, and then there was war. So, just wondered what you thought of that.
it's a really great question. I don't think we'll, for some time, know the real answer to this, but let me speculate a little bit. So first of all, I would point out this is the second time a war has started while negotiations are ongoing over the nuclear program, right? The attacks this summer, they were in the middle of negotiations. Now they're in the middle of negotiations and the war starts again. So at this point, the Iranian position is these were all a ruse. These were just to buy time and to try to figure out maybe what they had and then take it out. I don't know. Another possibility is that Witkoff and Kushner are not good negotiators, right? We could imagine that. The other possibility is that Oman was not necessarily, that a lot of the reports of concessions came through the Omanian mediators, and some have suggested that they were sort of overstating what Iran was giving up. Some in the Trump administration, but of course they have the incentive to say that, but even some folks who are more kind of centrist or even left-leaning are kind of like, I don't know. And many people pointed out that where they had gotten to, at least at the reported point where they broke down, was that Iran was still asking for the ability to create a 20% load of enriched uranium, which was actually, ironically, about what the Obama deal had gotten them. So they were just right back to the JCPOA. And to be really honest, I'm sure Trump saw that, and there was zero chance he was going to make a deal, right? He did not want to make the same deal that Obama did after he withdrew from it and said it was the worst deal ever made, et cetera, et cetera. So if that was truly Iran's bottom line, then they made a mistake. For the record, I predicted no war. I thought Iran would actually give Trump everything he wanted, and then some, so they could survive, keep repressing. Trump would declare victory very publicly. He brought peace to the Middle East. And then Iran would continue to do in secret whatever they wanted to do. And the Trump position would probably be, and the whole administration position would be, it's not our problem. It'll be a problem in 3 or 4 years. They'll be gone. That's someone else's problem to deal with. But I was completely wrong, 1,000% wrong about that. So don't ask me to pick your stocks.
John, can I ask you just a couple questions that are a little bit different than this is so wonderful, and I really appreciate how clear and thorough that you are, and this like a really amazing skill that you have to both be clear and thorough at the same time. No rabbi can do that. I'm curious a little bit, and I know the people here I think are more apt to be your senior auditors if you teach a class, but I'm a little curious about how are your students responding to the war in this war? And I think just so you know, I'm going to set you up. Like, I'd also love to hear how your students are thinking about, Israel and Palestine a little bit as well. Obviously, it's all connected. And I know that they're signing up to take a political science course, so you don't necessarily represent, every student at the University of Wisconsin, but especially the undergrads. So.
Yeah. So again, I'm lucky enough to be teaching this course now. It's about 200 students and about 10 senior auditors. So come on, come take the class.
Or just come back to Pat Valley.
Yeah, I'll be here all week. There's just a lot of people are concerned. People are, in general, obviously, the Madison students tend to be more left-leaning, and I think you see that. And there's a lot, there haven't been any large-scale protests, but just a lot of people just sort of scratching their head. A lot of students are kind of scratching their head. It's like, wait, why now? What's going on? There's a lot of mistrust. Look, I think a perfectly reasonable position to take, which you kind of did when you started out, and I hear this among the students, is Iran's terrible. We hope something can change in Iran, but are these the people you want carrying out the policy to make the change in Iran? It's like we like the mission, but we don't like who's running the mission. And so that's kind of a lot of the spirit of what I hear. There is this concern about terrorism, like long run, is this going to be a long war? And so it's just many of the same concerns I think that you see otherwise. The second part of that question is a great question. It's one that I spend a lot of time. Look, October 7th happens both when I'm teaching and when I'm department chair, so political science, and so there was a lot of, the university had a lot of things. I talked to a lot of students, some who were very upset, obviously, both about what happened in Israel and in the Gaza envelope, to Israelis and the hostages, some who were upset about the Israeli response and everything in between. My sense, for whatever it's worth, is that has largely died down. Like, I'm just not hearing that same level of anger or of nervousness. I think many of the Jewish students that I talk to in my courses still have their antenna up for sort of subtle anti-Semitism or even open anti-Semitism on campus. Frankly, some of the Arab students I talk to have kind of moved on at this point a little bit. I don't know, I think everyone was nervous this fall with everyone coming back, with the protests restart, et cetera, and they didn't really. Sort of like everyone cooled off over the summer, and I don't know whether that was a function of students have short attention spans, or it's just the momentum kind of died out, or they thought it's just, I don't know. But my sense is things have calmed down a fair bit on that dimension. And I haven't seen it restart this week based on what's going on, which you could imagine, right? You could imagine all that restarting and that flame reigniting based on this, and especially Israel's involvement in these operations. Yet again, there are very few students who are saying, oh, poor Iran. I mean, poor people living in Iran, but not poor Iranians, but not poor Iran regime.
I mean, certainly poor Iranians, right? I mean, right, no matter who the government there is, or, fear of missiles from the United States, and, poor Israelis, and
Absolutely, that's right.
Or the folks, American soldiers who are stationed in Kuwait, and we certainly can be like our hearts wide open for those all of those individuals. So, can I just ask you, and then we'll wrap? Like, what about the faculty? How are they thinking about this? This war. I don't know the demographics specifically of the UW political science faculty. As somebody that moved here from the college campus nearby with Stanford, like there was certainly, within the political science and the history department, there's certainly wide thought thinking, and Stanford, so people really like to promote themselves. But I'm curious about how the faculty are thinking.
I think most of the faculty, political science and history, and I can't quote you the time and place, but for example, tomorrow at the Pyle Center, several faculty in the history department are having what they're calling a teach-in. And it's not a protest per se, it's just they're gonna give a bunch of lectures at the Pyle Center on Iran and the history of Iran and the history of the Middle East politics. And so the history department's doing that. The faculty in political science, most of them that I've talked to kind of aren't happy about this, and shedding any tears for the Ayatollah, but it's just what everyone here is asked about. Planning, is this long or short? No one senses there's a plan, and that you kind of need a plan. One of my colleagues quoted, there's an interesting article online on The Atlantic by George Packer, and his kind of close was to quote Trump and saying, hopefully there's some people who will rise up and come to power who are more friendly in Iran. And Packer closes after that by saying, hopefully is a word people use when they don't have a plan. And I think that's the sentiment that a lot of the poli-sci and many of the university faculty have at this point. We have some folks who I tend to identify more conservative. They're keeping a more open mind about this and sort of pointing out this could lead to good things. But those of us who are slightly more critical say, we heard a lot about this in 2003 too. The neocons told us there was going to be peace for a generation after Iraq was over, and we're sitting here again.
Well, thanks for giving us an hour of your time. I do want to return just, and we are going to go to Israel, fingers crossed, next year. I think it's really important, and despite some of our hesitations is tame, our disagreement with the current Israeli government and the real concerns about, treatment of Palestinians and treatment of minorities and some of the real fissures with there. This is this is one of the great challenges of our people, right? And how do we continue to wrestle with these ideas? How do you continue to wrestle with the modern state of Israel, the Jewish homeland? And how do we continue to think through that? Certainly, I believe there's no better way to do that than to visit. We'll certainly ensure that that trip involves deep dialogue with Palestinians. We probably won't be able to go into the West Bank, but probably parts of East Jerusalem. And so, as well as, delighting in the miracle of modern Israel. And so that's what this meeting was supposed to be about. So we do hope you consider that. For those of you that are streaming, in the next couple weeks, Stephanie and I will send out more communication specifically about that. Hopefully there's aspirations for, some sense of quiet and peace in the region, even if we're, glass half empty on those ideas. But we do hope that's something that you would consider. We'll send out the webpage. We'll set up another information session, maybe on Zoom next time. We'll talk about what would be the best. So if that's something that you're interested, please let us know. I'll just tell a short story and then we'll let you go. So we live, and some of you know, John lives 5 houses from us, and right in between us is John and Becky Kaiser, members of Bethel. So we sort of say. And last year, right when Aaron and I moved here, there was the West Lawn Block Party. Dale's brother used to live on West Lawn, right? And the West Lawn Block Party. And one of our other neighbors gave this great idea, and they said, they asked our spouses to say, which John is which? And they put in different things, and we had to guess which John was this. So John Kaiser, John, and myself, we all stood next to each other. John was a little shorter than us, but we all stood next to each other, and one of the questions was, met his spouse in Israel. And the answer was our favorite non-Jewish John on the block, who met his spouse Jessica, who's become really good friends with Aaron, while on a work trip to Israel, right? So how cool is that? And so we love living next to John and Jessica and their 4 kids, and it's just been really a delight to become friends. And we've been talking a long time about, thinking about doing something in the work realm, and I really, really appreciate you coming in. So thanks for being here with everybody. Thanks to all those who are streaming. That would be cool.
In 2 weeks, I had tickets booked to Dubai with my kids. In 2 weeks from now, I was supposed to be in Dubai giving some talks. So
And aren't you going?
we're going to the Dells instead, at this point. We'll just go to
sabbatical in Taiwan?
We're going to do sabbatical in Taiwan next year.
You'll go to another community and talk about that geopolitics.
I'll come to Israel from Taiwan. It's a shorter flight.
All right, thanks everybody.